one of the co-chairs of the Northeast Heights Community Policing Council, and continuing on the tradition that Vicki started. I want to read the mission statement at the beginning of the meeting. And the mission of the Community Policing Council is to promote and maintain inclusive, respectful, and cooperative interactions between the community and the Albuquerque Police Department to ensure constitutional community policing reforms are met and sustained. Moving into the agenda, I would like to introduce the council members, and I'll go the way you're tiled on my computer screen. So Vicki, you are first.
Oh, okay. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us this evening. My name is Vicki Williams, and I have been on the council. This is starting my 5th year. I was chair for 3 years of the Northeast, and just looking forward to our guest speaker this evening. I hope she has some really good news about the legislative session. So thanks again for joining us.
Thank you, Vicki. James.
Hi there. Good evening, everybody. My name is James Santu-Stephen. I am a local homeowner and business owner, and been on the in this group now since November, and just excited to be a voice and stand up for our community, and of course help out in any way we can. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Willie.
Hi, I'm Willie Orr. I've been on the council for about a year. And I have found it very interesting. I'm certainly looking forward to Representative Matthews' discussion of the legislature, and look forward to continue to see how we can work with the community and the APD. Thank you.
Thank you, Willie. Francine.
Okay, so hello everyone. It's good to be here tonight. Thank you all for being here. My name is Francine Lopez. I'm currently a student at the University of New Mexico, studying sociology and communication. And I have been a part of the Northeast Community Policing Council for 1.5 years. I joined the Northeast CPC to create trust and transparency between our community and the Albuquerque Police Department. Once again, thank you all. Thanks to all of our panelists and to all of our community members for being here. And I would like to encourage everyone to use our council as a tool to create communication between our communities and APD. Thanks.
Thank you, Francine. Francine's also the my other part. She's my right hand, and I hope to be her. I hope I'm her left hand. She's the other co-chair. Cassandra had.
Good evening, everyone. Cassandra Morrison, retired from Albuquerque Police Department after 20+ years. Retired as a sergeant out in the field. Currently employed in the real estate industry. Just want to say thank you for everyone showing up this evening. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Cassandra. And a little bit about me. I've been on the council for 1.5 years, give or take. I'm a retired city of Albuquerque employee. I retired as the deputy director of the Family and Community Services Department, but more important to this effort, I worked for APD for 22 years, and in the old Planning and Policy Development Division. And APD is where my heart has always been, and I joined the CPC to try to build a bridge, a lasting bridge between the community and the Albuquerque Police Department. So moving right along, do I have a motion to approve the March meeting agenda?
I'll make that motion.
Okay.
Second.
Okay. Second.
Thank you. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Passes. Also, can I have a motion to approve the February meeting minutes? Do I have a motion?
I'll make a
Happy to make that
motion.
motion.
Okay, thank you. Motion second. Everyone approving, please signify by saying aye.
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 Okay. Now, I'm pleased to get to the interesting part of this evening's meeting, and that's to introduce our guest speaker, Representative Marion Matthews, who serves House District 27. And in her first legislative session, Marion stood up for our first responders and introduced her PTSD presumption for first responders bill. Representative Matthews also co-sponsored the Safer Communities Act to help get Albuquerque's crime problems under control. Representative Matthews has had multiple careers as an attorney, a children's advocate, criminal prosecutor, and educator, working in the public, nonprofit, and private sectors. Representative Matthews, welcome. Thank you for coming this evening, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Roy, and congratulations on becoming the, I guess, the head person of the community, of the Northeast Heights Community Policing. Vicki did a great job, and I'm sure that you will do likewise. I try to attend, over the years, I've tried to attend as many of these meetings as possible because I have learned so much from them about community policing and about what's happening in our Northeast Heights area, and also getting to know some of the officers who take care of us and help protect us. So I really thank you for the invitation. What I'd like to do tonight is, if it's all right, is to break this talk a little bit into two parts. And the first part, I'd like to talk about the challenges of getting crime legislation passed in the legislature. And I'm sorry, I'm trying to mess with the lights here. So sorry to keep moving around. I'll stop doing that. And then the second thing is I'd like to talk about what actually got passed and maybe didn't get passed. Is probably a number of you know, there was an omnibus crime bill at the very last minute of the session, HB 68. And then there were other crime measures that were passed that didn't receive as much publicity, but I think that several of them will be very impactful. So we've got quite a bit of activity in the session this year on crime. I certainly am going to try to leave time for a Q&A. So as I said, I'd like to kind of start with just sort of setting the framework of how we work through the legislature on crime legislation. And I've been the primary sponsor of various crime or crime-related legislation in 3 sessions now. And I'm, as Roy mentioned, I'm a former prosecutor. And I start from the framework that we need a criminal justice system that is an effective deterrent to crime. And that to reduce the number of people who become victims, we need to reduce the number of people who commit crimes. And to be an effective deterrent, we know from research that the best deterrent is the expectation that the person committing the crime will be caught. And that as a result of being caught, there will be an adverse consequence proportionate and appropriate for the crime committed. In other words, do we have the law enforcement resources and the judicial resources to catch and try people? And is the penalty for violation of the law an appropriate consequence? So I give you that framework because those are the kinds of questions that we ask as we work through crime legislation. And I have to admit that the legislature can be a pretty intimidating place to try to pass crime legislation. I'm going to describe what I'm calling silos that some of my colleagues occupy. And this is not a partisan assessment. It's just my observation of where you find legislators in terms of their attitudes toward crime legislation. And the reason this matters is because while the substance of a bill is really, really important in trying to get it passed, what I have to do as a sponsor is count votes. And I have to get the bill through, I have to have enough votes to get it through 2 committees of the House and passed on the floor of the House by a majority, and then 2 committees usually in the Senate and passed in the Senate on the floor by a majority. And after I do all that, then I have to ask, will the governor sign it? And so it's quite a trek. And all the way through this process, except for the governor signing it, what the sponsors are doing are counting votes. And that means we have to understand where our colleagues are in assessing what it is we're trying to do. Okay. As I said, I'm one of 2 former let's see, let me back up for a second. In the House, I'm a former prosecutor, and there's one other former prosecutor in the House. We have a former public defender, and we have a retired policeman. 4 of us out of 70 members actually have any real life experience in working in the criminal justice system. And that actually has quite a bit of impact. In the state Senate, there is one state senator who has experience as a prosecutor. And so there's not a lot of people who bring a lot of real life experience about this topic to the legislature. However, silo number 1 is many legislators think they are an expert. I don't know, they watch Law and Order or something, and they think they know a great deal about this topic. And a few of these are not in the least reluctant to kill a bill. And I'm going to give an example of in my first session in 2020, and I was sponsoring the bill that created a rebuttable presumption that if a police officer suffered PTSD, that it was job related, and so that they could obtain appropriate treatment and appropriate benefits. And this was Cassandra's idea, actually. And because the same bill, the same rebuttable presumption exists for firefighters, it just didn't exist for police or other first responders. So that bill, which would have created that presumption, whizzed through the House. I mean, it got passed easily, no problems. Committees, floor of the House. And then we went to our first committee in the state Senate. And 2 senators were doing the presentation, talking about what the bill does, had a police officer there talking about his experience and so forth. And 2 of the senators announced they had served in the military. They had seen much more horrible things than any cop would ever see. And they didn't have PTSD. Therefore, it was silly to even talk about police having PTSD. I am not making any of this up. I cited the stats that more police commit suicide than are killed in the line of duty. And literally one of those state senators from the far Northeast Heights up here, it's no longer in the Senate, said, I don't believe your statistics. And the bill was dead. It was gone. They took a vote and it got voted down. So, you know, it's kind of hard to argue with people who are telling you that they know more than the statistics tell you. You can't effectively in that circumstance do that, in fact. Silo number 2, we have legislators who do not want to incarcerate anyone. And I've literally had them tell me this as I've talked to them about supporting a bill. And they believe that crime is caused by poverty, racism, and other social ills, drug addiction, and so forth. And when we did a press release that I would be sponsoring what was the presumption bill in this legislative session, which is a different presumption than the PTSD bill from 2 years ago, one of the state senators tweeted that the bill, which hadn't even been written or shared with anybody yet, was and I am quoting what he tweeted, a racist piece of trash legislation sponsored by a white elite. That was the attitude. I didn't appreciate being called any of that, but anyway. So silo number 3, there are legislators who would imprison anyone who breaks the law. The only thing they believe, these legislators, is that the only thing that criminals understand is punishment, and the stronger the punishment, the better. So you've got extremes on both sides in the body. Silo number 4, we can't afford an effective criminal justice system. It costs too much money. And this group was pretty silent this last session, but one of the first questions I was asked about the pretrial presumption bill was how many more individuals would be detained, how many more PDs would be needed, how were our county jails supposed to fund an anticipated increase in the number of people who would be detained. And there is in fact a rule in the legislature that any change in the criminal law must go to one of the finance committees to price it out. And that impacts whether or not legislation gets passed. And then my last silo is there's those who think there's one cause of crime. Now, maybe they think that drugs are the source of all crime, or they think that guns are the source of all crime, or unwed mothers are the source of all crime, or video games. There's just a bunch of different theories. And again, you're back to trying to, if they feel that the bill doesn't address what they perceive as the primary cause of crime, they think there's nothing we can do, and they sort of dismiss your efforts.
Well, excuse me, Marion.
Yeah.
Excuse me. What did you say the 5th? How did you classify the 5th silo?
That these are the people who believe there's only one cause of crime.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and they have different beliefs as to what that one cause is, but that's their framework. Okay. All right. So I just wanted to share that because it influences what happens in the session. So let's talk about HB 68, which became, on the very last night of the session, an omnibus bill of over 60 pages once it got to the state Senate. It had passed the House. I was a sponsor of that bill, along with a number of others. And what happened was when the bill went to the Senate for approval, they took all the crime legislation, almost all the crime legislation that had been floating through the legislature and the different things, and they stuffed it all into this one bill. And then they sent it back to us, and I think it was about 6 a.m. in the morning on the last day when we are going to adjourn at noon to look at it and figure out what should happen. We're asked to concur at that point with their changes, and if we don't concur, time would run out, and the major piece of crime legislation in the 2022 legislature would have died at that point. There was no more time. Right? So the House concurred in the changes the Senate made. So going back to some of the things that I talked about at the beginning about how I analyze crime legislation. So the first thing I look at on HB 68 and some of the other bills, did we increase resources for fighting crime? And we did a number of things. All of these are not necessarily in 68, though 68 is chock full of lots of things. First of all, the governor gave a 16% raise to the state police, which presumably is going to help us keep state police on the job and will increase our law enforcement capacity. The original House Bill 68 had a whole system for retention bonuses after various points in time in a law enforcement officer's career. And the Senate took out our plan, they deleted it, and they put in their own plan, which is really hard to figure out what it does, but they basically deferred to the Department of Finance and Administration, which is a state agency which deals with money. And they basically said, DFA, come up with a plan, but we want retention pay differentials and recruiting bonuses. Now, recruiting bonuses, so our original bill only had retention bonuses if the officer stays for at least a year at a particular agency. So I'm not sure how this is going to work because DFA has to write some regulations and so forth. The idea was to use a common tool that's used in anybody's employment, which is that after a few years of good service, the military does this, after a few years of good service, in addition, in return for your agreement for staying at least another year, we're going to give you a bonus of whatever, $2,500 or whatever. And then 5 years or 6 years later, we're going to do it again, so that we're encouraging you to stay on the job. When you change that to a recruitment bonus, and as many of you know who are in law enforcement, it's not unusual for one law enforcement agency to pluck the cream of the crop from one agency and try to get them to come over to another. So I don't know, by expanding this to recruitment, what impact that's going to have on the ability of a particular police department or sheriff's office or whatever to keep their people, their officers and their people they work so hard to train and so forth. That one up in the air in my mind as to whether we ended up doing much good or not. One of the things we did, which I think is a benefit, is we increased the survivor benefit for an officer killed in the line of duty. That survivor benefit had been $250,000 and we increased it to $1 million. And it was long overdue to do that. And of course, the money goes to the officer's family if they're killed in the line of duty. A couple things that were done, and I don't know how law enforcement looks at this, whether they're going to consider it as positive or not. We divided the New Mexico Law Enforcement Academy, which is the organization that usually provides the certification for certified law enforcement officers. And we divided it into two entities. This is what the Senate did. The new one being the New Mexico Law Enforcement Standards and Training Council. And the job of this council is to develop and adopt basic training and in-service training standards for police officers and telecommunicators. And based on the debate in the Senate, telecommunicators is apparently 911, the people who do 911 operators. And then the legislature put out 8 topics of training curriculum items that each year an officer should be getting training in. And I know that this has been a little controversial, and some of the smaller departments are concerned about the ability to do this. From a layperson's attitude, this is the first time we have had an actual design for a curriculum in the statute for law enforcement on a statewide level. And from that standpoint, I think that this is positive. But again, I'm a police officer, law enforcement person might disagree with me. If we could improve the training of officers across the state by having a curriculum, I think that personally would be good. I know, and this was the source of a lot of talk, that one of the things that has been a real concern in the quality of the training of our law enforcement officers is criminal investigations and the detective work, if you will. And because there's, depending on who you talk to, there's some real concern that cases are lost because evidence wasn't properly documented or treated right, or the investigations weren't done very well. And investigatory techniques is one of the items of the curriculum. We also created a law enforcement certification board, and it's attached to the Department of Public Safety, the DPS, which is a cabinet level agency in state government. And one of the things it's supposed to do is create and maintain a database of excessive use of force, terminations, resignations, and decertifications, criminal convictions for on-duty conduct, and civil judgments against officers for improper use of force. Again, I'm not sure how the line officers are going to feel about that change. Maybe that's good, maybe it's bad. Again, I don't know how much input they got in writing some of this from local law enforcement. Another resource that was added was 3 new district court judgeships. And I guess along the same lines, the district judges got a huge raise. We were told that they needed this huge raise in order to be competitive, and it was substantial. In terms of actual criminal code changes, maybe I should stop for a second and see if anybody's got a burning question about sort of that resource issue. I am going to talk a little bit about some other resources that weren't in 68 later, but go ahead.
Okay. Francine is running our chat this evening. Are there any questions in the chat, Francine, regarding the silo issues?
No, Roy, there's no questions.
Okay. Do any of the council have questions? Vicky, yes.
So how do we deal with these silos? Because it just seems like everybody has their own opinion, and so nothing gets changed or nothing gets worked on because nobody can agree, because some people think nobody needs to be in jail, and some people think everybody that commits a crime needs to be in jail.
Right.
Some people think we can't afford it. And I mean, it's just so polarized that how do you make progress?
Well, that is a great question. And I want to, and I think I said this at the beginning, but I want to make it clear, this isn't about partisanship. This isn't about Democrat, Republican, because people you know, some it amazes you. I'm a Democrat and I support crime legislation all the time. I think the most important thing is to think about how we could encourage more people with some law enforcement background to run for the legislature, because there's so few of us who have that background, that it's so people come, and you know, who knows where they get some of their ideas about what law enforcement is about. I mean, part of it, I'm sure, is comes from TV and movies and things. I think it's a fair question to ask anybody running for this office what their commitment is to public safety and how they see our role in helping to encourage and be sure that we have the resources and the laws which would improve public safety. And these are some tough questions. And I just give an example. There are substantial numbers of people who think that there's far too many guns on the street. But I would tell you that politically, the concept that a bill would pass that would take away, that would limit, for example, individual gun rights is just, no pun intended, it's dead on arrival. I mean, it's not politically possible, no matter what your party is. So what we do instead is what we tend to do is increase the penalties for committing crimes with guns, which is one way you hopefully are going to deter crime. But we just had this case with the 14-year-old who got arrested for killing the high school senior out at West Mesa. And where did that gun come from? It was a ghost gun coming off the internet. And I'm really thinking about, that is so beyond kind of a legitimate source for a weapon. It seems to me, I'm thinking about the possibility of actually sponsoring a bill to, and it's hard to do at the state level because these things are kind of national problems, not state problems, but making it illegal to have a ghost gun or to make a ghost gun. But, you know, I'm sure I'll get hundreds of emails if I do that, which is okay. I mean, that just comes with the job, but it's trying to find the medium ground on some of these issues is very difficult. Part of it is to keep talking to each other and to let people know that you all as citizens expect the legislature to step up to the plate and do what's necessary to change our laws and to provide the resources for law enforcement. And it's maybe even more than changing laws, is providing enough resources. It's providing enough money. It's providing training. It's doing all those things that need to be done. Okay. So if it's okay, Roy, I'll switch to some of the new crimes we have.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
All right. So one of the new crimes is called the Chop Shop Bill. And this has been floating around the entire time I have been in the legislature. I remember it from 3 years ago. And a chop shop is a place where unlawfully obtained motor vehicles are chopped up. And it's taken at least 3 years, maybe longer, to get this bill passed. And it makes it a third-degree felony to operate, own a chop shop, and do a whole bunch of other things. There's a lot of language in it. But hopefully that will be something that might actually help reduce the rate of car thefts we have in Albuquerque and in the state. We also created a crime of criminal damage to property by theft or attempted theft of regulated material. Okay, I'm going to put that in English for you. One of the items that thieves really like to steal these days are catalytic converters. They can get under a car that's left in a driveway, cut off that catalytic converter in a matter of minutes, and then take it to a metal dealer, METAL dealer, and sell it because it's filled with all kinds of metals that have high value. So this bill, we see all the time, people are stealing copper piping out of utility poles and all kinds of things like that. So this bill is all about those pieces of metal that have value that people are stealing, and creates the crime. And it covers copper, brass, steel, guardrails, street signs, manhole covers, all kinds of stuff. And of course, catalytic converters. Now, if the value of what was stolen is less than $1,000, it's considered, the penalty is a petty misdemeanor. If it's 1,000 to 200, I'm sorry, 1,000 to 2,500, it's a misdemeanor. And if it's 2,500 or more, it is a 4th degree felony. So at the low end, these crimes are not, they don't have a very heavy penalty. This statute also, or this bill, also amended current law to require that those who are in the business of buying secondhand metal, that they require that they be shown proof of ownership before they buy it. And that should help. This isn't, a lot of this happens, and it's a real financial burden on a lot of people. A lot of times car and auto insurance doesn't cover this. And I had in my district here, one of the nonprofits that has its office down across from the Arroyo del Oso golf course. They had 3 trucks that they kept out there to transport people to whatever their program was. And one night somebody came along and stole all 3 catalytic converters. It was going to cost them something like $10,000 to replace all that. And it was a nonprofit. I mean, they didn't have that kind of money. So thankfully, hopefully that law will help. We made it a crime to threaten a judge or the judge's family. This was kind of an interesting debate. During the debate on the House floor, somebody pointed out that we had never had an incidents of this happening, but it has happened in other states, and so now it is a crime. We increased various penalties for brandishing guns. We added a crime. It's already a crime to make a bomb threat against a building. Now now we've made a crime to make a shooting threat against a building. I'm gonna come and shoot up your school. That's now become a crime, where before it wasn't. And then there's some things, and there's some few things like that sort of got changed a little bit. The bill that I worked on and that did not pass, which I also call a presumption bill, though it had nothing to do with the PTSD presumption bill I carried 2 years ago, I guess. This is a bill that I worked on with the Association of District Attorneys, including our DA, Raul Torres. And this was a bill, and let me back up for a second. In 2016, people of the state approved an amendment to the New Mexico Constitution. And this was called the Bail Reform Amendment. And what used to happen is that if somebody got arrested, the court would set a money bail in order to release them. And so there was a business called bail bondsman. Used to see their signs up down by the courthouse all the time. And there became a national movement to reform bail law. And the reason was that particularly for people charged with misdemeanors, they often didn't have the money to post the bail, and they would lose their jobs. Their families would be distraught over misdemeanor crimes. And in effect, they were in prison for not having enough money to get out. So nationwide, an effort became, there was a move to do this so-called bail reform. And New Mexico is one of the states that did. And the amendment we passed basically did away totally, though it doesn't say this, but it basically did away totally with money bail. We no longer in New Mexico, with very rare instances, exceptions, require that somebody who's been arrested for a crime, either a misdemeanor or a felony, post money bail in order to be released pending their trial. Instead, a system was created in which the district attorneys can ask for pretrial detention. And if they ask for pretrial detention, there is a hearing, and all of this happens very, very fast. There is a hearing, and the judge, the district judge, will decide whether the individual should be released pending their trial, and if released, what would the conditions of release be? In some cases, and this was amazing to me, in the first year or so that this bail reform, which was passed in 2016 and really kind of started chugging along by 2018, in the first year of that, over 50% of the people who were charged with homicides were released on their own recognizance, which I found to be just pretty staggering. Anyway, the court has a matrix, and it determines what the conditions of release will be. And the most serious condition of release, if they order release, is that the individual will wear an ankle bracelet, a GPS monitor around their ankle. And there may be associated with that requirements like, and you can't come within 2 miles of your ex-wife's house. Say it's a domestic violence situation, or you can't be in this neighborhood or that or whatever, okay? Since this amendment went into effect over the last few years, there has been an increase in crime rates in many communities. The Institute of Social Research at the University of New Mexico says that it's not people released pre-trial that is causing the rise in crime. They're only responsible for a small amount. But all the Institute of Social Research looks at is who gets arrested for crimes. And if no arrests are being made for crimes, then nobody knows who committed those crimes. And we had 118 homicides in Albuquerque last year. I think that's the right number. And at least at one point in time, well over 70 of them had not been solved. And I'm not criticizing the police. All I'm saying is that when you look at statistics that tell you that that these people released pre-trial are not creating or causing or are committing these crimes, we actually don't know that. Because we don't know who committed those 70 crimes, those 70 homicides. One of the things, so the district attorney, Raul Torres, got very upset about the number, about half of the time when he brought requests for detention on serious violent felonies, about half the time the district judges were releasing the individuals. And so he thought we should have the same system that is used by federal law enforcement, which is a presumption that if you're charged with certain crimes, and not only charged, but there's probable cause to believe you committed certain serious violent felonies, that there would be a presumption that you should not be released because of your risk because you were dangerous and it was a risk to public safety. So he proposed that. The governor announced that she would support that. And at some point in this process, I had called him. I had not met him before. I was just reading the newspaper and seeing the level of violent crime occurring, and that at least in some instances, it was people on pretrial release who were allegedly committing these crimes. And I called Raul Torres and I said, tell me what's going on and what we can do about it, because I'm a legislator and maybe I can help. And we met, and he talked to me about the way the federal government does it. And as I said, the governor announced she would sponsor, it would be part of her crime package. And I agreed to sponsor the bill. And it took a lot of work to write it. And part of the reason it takes a lot of work to write it is because our constitutional amendment is different than the federal constitutional amendment that relates to bail and so forth. And trying to be sure we made it so it would be constitutional under New Mexico law was a real challenge. I introduced it. I read you one of the quotes from one person who thought it was the most terrible bill they'd ever seen before they'd even seen it. We went into the first hearing, and it was a pretty brutal hearing. We had a number of the legislators question its constitutionality, which was fine, but others just said it was a terrible idea and we couldn't possibly do this and yada, yada, yada. All right. So it also had been backed by the city of Albuquerque, and the mayor came and spoke on his behalf. Now remember, I told you about one of my jobs as a sponsor of legislation is to count votes. Okay, I still think the presumption bill was a good bill. But when I sat down and counted votes, I realized that we were not going to get it through. So I began to change it, listening to the critics, talking to people, what they would find acceptable and so forth. Anyway, came up with a bill that didn't create a presumption as such. And then at that point, in the process of talking to Chief Medina and other law enforcement people around the state, found out that the GPS monitoring system for these ankle bracelets had turned out to be a real problem. And it was a problem for a number of reasons. First of all, initially, there was not 24/7 monitoring. The monitoring that was occurring, and almost anybody who has these on who's charged with a felony is charged with a serious violent felony. It's not writing bad checks. It's a serious crime. And so what was happening was nobody had funded this program. And And to the extent it was being monitored, the whereabouts of these people was being monitored 8 to 5, Monday through Friday. I guess, crime doesn't happen over the weekend, except it does, as we know. So, and then the second problem that came up was that law enforcement could not always access the information from the GPS monitors. In some jurisdictions, like the Second Judicial District, which is ours, they wanted the officers to get warrants to get it. Now, then a couple changes were made. It became public that the monitoring wasn't occurring 24/7. And that got changed, and some money was appropriated actually when we did redistricting in December to start to finance the coverage. And so the monitoring got better, but it was a real shock to people to find out that people charged with these very serious crimes were out there without anybody watching what they were doing. And when the GPS, when the presumption bill looked like I wasn't going to have the votes. I couldn't get it passed. And so I started focusing more on, and again, with the work, with the help of the district attorneys and Chief Medina and others, about this whole question of the GPS monitoring. At least I thought we could have an effective tool for law enforcement to have access to where these folks are when they're on release. I'm gonna make this long story much shorter if I can here. I ended up actually sitting down with the Chief Justice of the New Mexico Supreme Court, and we devised a bill that first of all required 24/7 monitoring of any felon released with a GPS monitor. So that became statutory. We required that if the people who monitor it, which is often private companies, quite frankly, that if they verified that somebody had gone where they had breached the terms of release, okay, the conditions of release that allowed them to be free pending their trial, that they would immediately notify law enforcement within the area in which the defendant was, where it was occurring, and provide that information as to location, which is all that the GPS monitor does, is tell you location, that would be immediately provided so that law enforcement could go and apprehend these people, hopefully. We read about stories where they cut the thing off. That would be a violation of terms of release, among other things. And then the third thing we said was, because we're monitoring 24/7, we don't need to do warrants because there is no expectation of privacy, which is where the warrant requirement comes from. If you know that somebody is tracking your location 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, how can you expect that where you are can possibly be, that you have a right of privacy to that? And so we provided that law enforcement and public defenders and so forth could get access to that data upon request. And unfortunately, in the process, by the time we got this worked out, we were so far along in the House in terms of this session that that bill never came to the House floor for vote. But it did make it through committees. And there was some kind of a similar bill, but different bill over in the Senate. So I'm sending the senators my bill and saying, here's how we need to do this. And the Supreme Court's on board. And this is the best way we can protect public safety. And as far as I know, they never did anything because they passed a totally different kind of a bill, which now the Association of District Attorneys has asked the governor to veto because it doesn't fix the problems we were trying to fix. The governor probably can't veto that language in HB 68 because of the way the veto rules work. And so we've ended up with almost kind of, there's nothing in there that deals with when they violate conditions of release that even authorizes law enforcement to be provided that data. And then it requires, after the fact, that it be part of a criminal investigation based on reasonable cause. Creating, in effect, almost the right of privacy where one clearly cannot exist. So that is a long explanation. But that was for me just a real big disappointment because I thought that while we couldn't get the presumptions fixed, pretrial presumptions, we could at least be sure that this information was going to law enforcement to help them do their job. And I thought it was an important tool. All right. And then real quick, let me just tell you about a couple other things. I'm a member of the Health and Human Services Committee, and we had a hearing interim committee meeting last September, and there were statistics provided as to the number of cases, sex assault, sex crime cases, rape cases that were being dismissed in various parts of the state. And in some parts of the state, 91% of the cases were being dismissed, never even being tried. I was a prosecutor for the Attorney General's office, and I prosecuted rape cases. And it was common, particularly in small counties, for those cases to come to the Attorney General's office because we had expertise to do them. And they often didn't have expertise, or they were very uncomfortable doing it because it might involve prominent people in the community and so forth and so on. Anyway, at that point in time, at that hearing, I talked to the representative from the AG's office, and I said, why don't you guys do more of these? Plus, why don't you train prosecutors and law enforcement in the small communities on how to do these cases? And son of a gun, they have now been funded in the budget, and I don't think the governor signed a budget, but hopefully she won't veto this part of it. 6 additional prosecutors and money for expert costs to prosecute these cases. They also received an additional $1 million for prosecutorial training and expertise for cases of sexual violence, including human trafficking and murdered and missing Indigenous women. So hopefully we're going to get a grip on sex crimes, which are serious violent offenses, obviously. And then a few other things I wanted to share in terms of funding. Another $6.6 million was added to funding for services for victims of sexual assault and domestic violence. 1.4 million went to the New Mexico Sentencing Commission. 2.2 million more went for expanded crime reduction grants awarded under the Crime Reduction Act. These are usually for pilot programs. They reinvested 2.1 million in prison cost savings from declining inmate populations into evidence-based recidivism reduction programming and transitional housing for offenders re-entering the community to prioritize treatment over punishment. 10.7 million went to New Mexico Corrections Department for evidence-based programs to reduce recidivism. And another 300,000 went for a new office of gun violence prevention at the Department of Health. So this legislature put its money where maybe its mouth always wasn't, or something. I think I just screwed that metaphor up. But substantial amount of money has gone into public safety issues. There's also additional money for behavioral health programs and for drug addiction programs. There is no one single source of crime. There's no one single cause of crime. And we absolutely, and I'm a total supporter of looking at the social programs we need, the behavioral health programs we need, the law enforcement programs we need in order for us to get a grip on what's happening in our city, and quite frankly, talking to DAs across the state, throughout our state. The level of violence is unacceptable, and we just absolutely have to continue working on this with every resource we can. And with that, I will stop and see if you have questions.
Okay, thank you. Do we have anything in the chat, Francine?
Yes, so we have two questions. So the first one is from David Walker, and he asks if any of the crime bills that you mentioned will be revisited.
I'm sorry?
If any of the crime bills that you mentioned will be revisited.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure they will. Chop Shop is a perfect example. It took at least 3 years to get it through, and frequently we come back and we look at we come back and we try a bill a second time, and we try a bill a third or fourth or fifth time, whatever it takes. If it's a good idea, it's kind of strange, but once the legislature kind of gets used to hearing about a particular kind of a bill over a period of time, they start to pay more attention to it. And so absolutely. And sometimes you just have to figure out an alternative way to do it. One of the things I'm looking at in terms of pretrial detention, maybe what we need to do is try to amend our state constitution so that we have less of a problem in the appropriate circumstance of detaining people who are charged with serious violent felonies and are certainly at risk of recidivating.
Okay, thank you. The next comment and question is from Peggy Neff, and she's just thanking you for your hard work. And her question is, what are the next steps for improved opportunities for detention of repeat violent felons, and how can we help to promote them? Wow.
Well, I think certainly one possibility is amending that that amendment that was passed in 2016. And let me say something. I'm not in any way suggesting we go back to the old bail system. And there's a huge difference between people charged with misdemeanors and people charged with felonies, particularly serious violent felonies. I don't want people held in jail because they didn't have enough money to make bail. I want people held in jail if they are a danger to the community and we don't have another way to protect the community. That's when we should be holding people in jail pending their trial. And our amendment, it maybe went a little too far. I mean, at least we seem to be having substantial problems with it. There was actually a case, and I talked to the mother of the young man who was killed, in which the person who shot him was wearing their ankle bracelet, their GPS manager at the time of the shooting. I mean, that's just not. We got to do better than that. We absolutely have to do better than that.
Okay, thank you. We had one more question come up from Mike and Terry. And their question is, can you add pawn shops into the Chop Shop bill to control the fencing of stolen items?
That is a great question. And there has been some discussion at various times over the years of restrictions, statutes relating specifically to pawn shops. And I quite frankly, off the top of my head, don't know if any of those passed or what the current status is, but I can, if Mike and Terry would email me at my legislative email, and I can put that, maybe Kelly can put that up for me. I would be happy to look that up and let them know what the answer to that is. I just don't know off the top of my head.
Okay, thank you. We have another comment from Jackie, and she is giving a suggestion to tie the cost of replacement of precious metal materials to the law when it gets revisited rather than the scrap costs. You'll have a higher parameter penalties and a truer picture of the cost to victims.
Okay. Jackie, again, if I'm asking Kelly if he could please put my legislative email up on the chat, and if you could email that to me, and that way I won't forget or get it wrong, more likely get it wrong.
Okay, thank you. Next is from Janice. And she says, how would we change an animal abuse neglect misdemeanor charge to a felony charge? Animal abuse neglect usually coincides with domestic violence, child abuse.
Yes. That's a great question. And I would certainly be willing to look at that statute and see if there was some way that we might be able to do that. It might be based on it occurring more than one time, for example, if it's a second offense, if it involved particularly cruel kinds of behavior. I mean, I can think of a number of things sort of off the top of my head that might be appropriate for a higher level of crime. And I'm sorry, what was the name of the person who asked that? Jackie?
Janice.
Janice. Oh, so Janice, they've put my email up on the chat, so please share your concern with me there, which is absolutely fine. And I'm not going to bug you to death, but it lets me keep track of the things people are asking me to do.
The next question is asking, who do we notify in early mornings when people go house to house checking car doors?
Hopefully you would, there's probably a couple things, and I'm going to defer to Sergeant Symes primarily for that, because that's an actual law enforcement question, and I'm not a police officer and I haven't been. But one of the things that I think really matters to help keep a community safe and avoid some of those kinds of problems is a really good neighborhood, what do I want to call it? Basically a neighborhood association, a neighborhood watch, people who are watching out for each other is one of the best ways to reduce the amount of property crime, I think, in neighborhoods. But I'll defer to Sergeant Symes on how else that would be reported.
Yeah, definitely. I would call 242 cops in that instance and notify police if you see somebody in the neighborhood checking door handles. That's indicative of people committing auto burglary, which we take seriously and would respond to as quickly as we possibly could.
And the other thing I would just add to that is I know from working with Chief Medina that there's real concern in the city about people stealing cars and that leading then to a much more violent crime, and which is why they take it so seriously. I think I hope that's accurate.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have a question from Willie.
Go ahead, Will.
I'm trying to unmute. There we go. So, Representative Matthews, thank you very much. It was very interesting. I have a couple of questions. One is more procedural for my ignorance of law. And because when you were talking about the medal thing, people went from a misdemeanor to a felony. Obviously, that's a significant difference. What's the difference between someone who has a misdemeanor and someone who has a felony?
In general, in terms of property crime, it will relate to the value of the property that's being stolen.
And to the individual, if what's the difference for me if I'm charged with a misdemeanor as opposed to a felony if I do something bad?
There's a substantial difference. If you're a misdemeanor, the maximum jail term for a misdemeanor, and it's jail, not prison, is basically a year. But many misdemeanors are resolved by tickets. They're resolved by a fine. They're resolved by a minimal amount of jail time. A felony, most of the time, anybody charged and convicted of a felony is going to serve some time. If they're incarcerated, they will serve the time in a prison as opposed to a jail.
Thank you. But I suddenly realized I didn't really know what the difference was. And so that's useful for me. Secondly, kind of a general comment. I certainly had some concerns about the presumptive detention because of my concerns that you would therefore increase the number of people in detention. I mean, it just you have, and the detention is not good for anybody too. I mean, that's unfortunately there are downsides for people who are never charged. To be in detention is not a good place. I'm really in favor of what you were doing with the GPS monitors, and I certainly hope next year you can put a bill which complies with what the Supreme Court Justice wanted, what you tried to do, and get that passed for money, because I think that sounds to me like a much better system to really catch and monitor the people who are doing bad things. So so I would really support that. I think it's a great idea.
I appreciate that, Willie. But let me just no one is jailed who is not charged.
Right.
Okay. So we don't do that.
I know that.
Hopefully we don't do that in this country.
No, I do understand that, but on it's interesting that certainly some lawyers, and my son happens to be a lawyer, were upset at what seemed to be the change of presumed guilty and still proven innocent, as opposed to innocent until proven guilty with the presumptive detention. So would you comment on? I mean, that's again, but beyond my information and knowledge. So would you comment on that briefly?
Well, that's a great question. The presumed innocent until proven guilty is nowhere in the U.S. Constitution. You will not find that language. What you do find in the U.S. Constitution is the 8th Amendment, which talks about the right to bail. And so as far back as the beginning of our country, there has never been a rule that says if you're charged with a serious crime, you can't be detained prior to your trial.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so people confuse the presumption of innocence with that a good deal. The presumption of innocence is who has the burden of proof in a criminal trial. And it's the state, as it should be, to prove that the defendant did it. The other thing is there's a number of protections, both constitutional and historical, including the requirement of finding a probable cause, which means that there's been a determination that a crime has been committed and that the defendant is the person who committed the crime. And the grand jury process uses an independent group of people to judge that evidence. The preliminary hearing process actually has a judge hear the probable cause evidence. So there's always some kind of an outside person, either the grand jury or the judge, who is looking over the prosecutor's shoulder and saying, are you abusing your power? And those are baked into the system now.
Okay. James, you have your hand up.
Yeah, number one, I'd like to thank you for your service, and you're very sharp, and I've really enjoyed listening to you. So thank you. But I do have a couple of quick comments I'd like to make. I haven't heard you talk about, I think the important part is enforcing some of the great laws that are already on the books. I continue to hear you say you want to go forth and try to come up with some new laws, but number one, I don't know why we don't enforce some of the laws that we currently have on the books. One of them would be panhandling, if we can curtail some of that. And I know that's kind of a sore subject, but I would say 90% of those guys out there are just heavy drug users. And that's my opinion. As a business owner too, one of my concerns is you keep talking about chop shops. As somebody that owns a car business and an automotive repair shop and sits on the local state board and the national board, we don't see chop shops as a national issue with auto theft. Us as being in the top 5 in the last, 7 years, it's all, what we've seen lately, primarily in the last 5 years, is more of the common druggie stealing the car, swapping it between friends. We get them back now and they're just hammered and drug use. And I do agree, been in the industry 44 years. At one time, chop shops were doing that. And we had to put a fence around our building, but certainly catalytics are a big issue. But number two is when we have body shop issues, they come and steal certain things like hoods, grills, running boards, that sort of stuff. But chop shops, I think, are kind of a moot subject, in my opinion. Also, I think, what is your thoughts as far as also our judges that are out there nowadays? They're quick about going after the cops, but I think it's real important that we should be going after our judges. This last year, the Journal was rating some of the judges, and it seems to be running roughshod with the judges. And especially, I'm a firm believer in bail. And I can tell you, when we've run into criminals, which we helped catch one last Wednesday at 1 o'clock, this guy was behind Honey Baked Ham on Manal with a big old chrome gun, just rolling it in his hand like he was some kind of gangster. And it took about 22 minutes from calling the police to actually get them to engage, clear the area, and go forth before they could even draw their weapons. So, with this, with some of the rules that they're under, it just seemed to take forever for them to engage. So I think we really need to enforce our laws, and we can certainly have a deeper conversation, but I'm long-winded and I can go on forever. So again, thank you for your service. And if I can ever help with some of the things that we continue to see day in and day out, helping to enforce our laws would be a big issue. But as far as referring to judges, I can tell you as a business owner, one of the concerns I have right now, and I shared this with Raul Torres and with our Attorney General, we have a complaint that we have right now, and I'm not proud to share it, but we got a guy that bought a car 8,000 miles ago. He jump-started it the other day and blew the computer out. And now somehow this is in Metro Court. This, number one, he doesn't have a foot to stand on, but why is this judge not flipping it to district court or arbitration, which is what's required on our paperwork? So I don't know, these judges are pretty fishy. So I thought I'd share that with you, and happy to go into that more detail one of these days if you'd like, but something's fishy there.
Thank you, James. And you ever have a specific question like that you want me to respond to, I'm happy. They put my email on the chat there, and I'm happy to do that and have those conversations with you. I appreciate your comments.
Do we have any other questions in the chat at this time, Francine?
Yes. So I believe this question will be directed to Sergeant Sims. So Marguerite is asking, who do we notify hours later when we have guys on camera checking car doors?
So again, I would call 242 cops and notify us. You never know if those same suspects perpetrated any auto burglary or any other crimes within the area, and that is always good to share. Oftentimes what I do see personally is people share that on Nextdoor, and they count that as sharing with law enforcement, and that absolutely is not sharing with law enforcement. You need to contact us directly. social media, Nextdoor, those sorts of things. Those are kind of a closed circuit way of sharing it, and it gets the word out to your neighbors, which is good, but it doesn't necessarily wind back up with law enforcement and getting us that information that we may need for an investigation.
Okay, thank you. And the next question is from Aletta, and she is asking, what is the capacity and current number of individuals being held at MDC?
Wow, I actually just got an email not too long ago. The capacity, but, and again, if she will email me, I would send her precise figures, but in general, I don't want to take time looking for that right now. But in general, MDC it has a lot more space than it's currently using in terms of incarceration for holding people. And the biggest problem that MDC is having is not the number of people that are currently there. It's that they're really lacking in the number of correctional officers they have working there. They're having the same problem that restaurants and all kinds of other businesses are having in finding enough people to do the work. And I will give a shout out here to Bernalillo County. I've spent some time touring their facilities particularly for addiction programs and so forth. I just think they're really ahead of the city at this point on some of the things they're doing. And one of the things they do at MDC, which I think is really important, a lot of people come in, they have drug addiction issues, and they have the alternative drugs for the inmates in order to help them get off of heroin or whatever. And I'm sorry, I don't remember the names of all the various drugs and so forth that are used in order to help people deal with their addictions. But the county jail is one of the few places where that kind of treatment is provided. And unfortunately, our prisons don't do that at all, which I think is unfortunate, because I think it would help many people perhaps overcome their addictions, which is certainly a source of one of the causes of crime.
I have a question for you. Since I've retired, I haven't kept track of, when short sessions are and versus long sessions. Is it easier to pass laws in long sessions, or is it equally as hard to pass law as it is in short sessions?
My opinion is that it is easier to pass particularly more substantive laws in long sessions. Short sessions the pace is just incredibly fast, and so much of it relates to money, because the primary purpose of the short session is to do the budget for the state. And lots of bills get introduced, and then they go, let me back up just for a second. Most people don't realize this, but the state budget is basically put together in October and November, well before we actually meet. And so what happens is that in a 30-day session, all kinds of people come in with bills that need funding. And if they don't get funding, then the bill will die, even though the idea might be a good idea, but it needs money. And in the short session, they just run through those. It's just like, nope. With occasional, yeah, but mostly no's. In the long session, you really have more time to consider bills and amend bills if they need to be amended and changed to make them more likely to get positive votes. And in a short session, it's really, really difficult. It's one of the other problem with the short session is the governor controls the agenda. I'm working with a group of legislators, and we're looking at ways to make our legislature more effective. And a couple of the ideas we're batting around is to no longer have the governor control the agenda, and secondly, to extend the amount of time that we meet, because 30 days is. I mean, we passed an $8.5 billion in the 30-day session. That's just, I mean, we really need a little bit more time.
Thank you. Vicky, you had your
So-
hand up.
Yes, thank you. Right. I was just going to say to Aletta, the question that she has about the capacity and current number of individuals held at MDC, that information is available on a daily basis at MDC's website. You
Yeah.
can find it out anytime you want. Just go to MDC's website. It's
That's
there.
good. Thank you. I forgot that. Yes, that's correct.
Do we have any further questions, Francine?
That's
Okay.
it for now.
Representative Matthews, I really, really enjoyed your presentation, and I want to thank you on behalf of the Northeast Community Policing Council for your presentation. I guess I may have jumped the gun. I need to ask any of our council members if they have questions of Representative Matthews before letting you go. I don't see any, so thank you again, Representative Matthews, and please accept our invitation in the future to come back and speak to us. We certainly would like to have you give us a periodic report card on how the legislature is doing. So thank you very much, and thank you for your service.
But thank you all so much for what you do. And, you know, we all are just working to try to make our community as good as it can possibly be. And I appreciate all that you all do too. And I thank you very much. And I would love to come back and bend your ears some more.
All
It's
right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One thing I'd like to do at this point, we have two members that joined the meeting. Maybe they might want to say a few things. I'd like to introduce Troy Taylor.
Hello, everyone. I'm Troy Taylor. I've been on the board for 5 years. Thank you very much, Representative, for presenting tonight. Very informative. I have been on the board because part of my challenge is I have 4 kids that I'm raising here in Albuquerque. This is my home. I've been here for about 11, maybe 12 years now, but I don't really have any intentions on going anywhere else. So, you know, this is where I want to raise them. But in order to do that, things need to change. I need to try to help be a voice for you all that are on this Zoom tonight. So if there are questions or issues, concerns you have, please do share it with us. We want to try to make these very much appropriate for what you need to meet your needs and within the city. So definitely share any questions you have. We want to thank you, and I appreciate the time, and I look forward to working with you all more often.
Representative Matthews, I just got word, we have one more question, but before I go back to you, I'd like to introduce Kenneth Armijo, another member.
Hi, I'm Kenneth Armijo. I've been on the CPC board for about 1.5 years now. I really appreciated your talk. I also really appreciate your legislative will to keep pushing these bills forward. You mentioned how some of these bills can kind of take a few years to finally mature to the point where you can move them forward. So that takes a lot of patience, and also patience. I mean, we're all human and everything. But also just want to say I think it's important that we keep trying to help make our community better and keep that will, since we all know that there is quite a bit of crime in our community, but it's important that we consider what is substantive and what is fundamental to the problems, and we keep trying to push the legislation that addresses those important areas. So thank you. And for all those that are attending in the public, thank you all for attending. And as Troy mentioned, I'd just like to echo, I think it's really important to also participate if you can and keep asking your good questions. Thanks.
Okay, Francine.
Okay, last question we have from Karen, and she's asking, who decides how much each organization receives?
I'm assuming she's referring to the budget process.
I believe so.
And that is a great question. The budget, the budget begins in the House, not the Senate. And the budget committee is a large committee made up of a number of legislators from throughout the state. And they start meeting, they'll meet during the summer. All of us in all the committees we serve on meet at various times during the summer and so forth. But the budget committee starts holding hearings very early. They hear from each agency that's seeking funding. These are state agencies, part of government. And those organizations come and they present their budgets and they have to justify what they're seeking. Often they'll ask for increases for various particular programs. They may ask for increases in the number of personnel they're entitled to and so forth. And then that committee continues to meet literally, and I know this is true because my office roommate during the 30-day session was a member of the House Finance Committee. And they would start meeting at about 7:30 in the morning, and they would go until they would have another 3 or 4 or 5 hours worth of hearings virtually every day up until about 2.5, 3 weeks into the 30-day session. I would have committee hearings every day during the week too, but not for that long a period of time. It is the hardest working committee in the legislature. I think that is an accurate statement, which is the House Finance Committee, the HFC.
Thank you. Any further questions before we let Representative Matthews leave?
No, I believe that's it.
Well, once again, Representative Matthews, thank you. Thank you for spending time with us this evening and look forward to having you back in the future.
Thank you very much. And I may stop my video so I can grab something to eat, but if it's okay, I like to attend these meetings. I like to hear what you guys talk about.
You bet. You're welcome to stay the whole meeting. We'd love that.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, moving on. Do we have any new business before the council? Okay. Any recommendations? Okay, we'll move now to our APD portion of the presentation. And as I mentioned earlier, Francine will be sharing the screen and putting up the crime statistics, the CADS data that was provided to us. So Commander Weber, I always like to follow the chain of command, and the floor is yours. Thank you for coming this evening.
Thank you, Roy and Francine and everyone else. And that was quite an enlightening presentation from our representative. So, you know, we're obviously involved in some of that process that she mentioned, but I still learned, you know, it's interesting always to hear from people who are kind of on the ground floor of how the sausage is made, so to speak. So thank you very much for that. Before we move on to the crime numbers, I did want to introduce our new crime prevention specialist. Her name is Angie Casillas. I will let her talk a little bit about herself, but she is a longtime city employee and applied for this position when it became open and did exceptionally well in our selection process. And we're very excited to have her because, as everyone knows, we've been without a crime prevention specialist since, I don't know, early September. And the government being what it is and the wheels of bureaucracy turning slowly, it just takes this long to get someone hired and onboarded. And we are in the process of getting her up to speed. She's working with Laura Keene, who is our senior crime prevention specialist across the department with 25 years of experience. And so she's drinking from the fire hose, and we hope to get her more involved in these meetings in the future. But with that said, I'll see if Angie wants to introduce herself a little bit.
Okay.
Hello, I'm Angie Casillas, and I started about 3 weeks ago, almost 4 weeks ago. So I'm fairly new. I'm still trying to get up to speed on everything. But I'm here to help, and I'm looking forward to working with everyone.
Well, welcome, and
Thank you.
we're glad you're on board. Okay, back to you, Commander Weber. Do you have anything further?
Let's see, the newsletter will be going out, I think, at the end of this week. So you'll get some fresh information there. We are starting to advertise our briefings again, where citizens can participate and attend those briefings. So we are gonna, in the newsletter, we're gonna list times and locations where anyone from the public can attend, just to get a glimpse of the briefing. It'll be about 30 minutes of their time, or however long they want to spend. But just kind of a different way for us to interact with the community is for them to actually, come out without having to go on a ride along, without having to fill out a waiver, without having to, maybe take more time out of their day than they really have. And so we're starting with the easiest hours, which so all the times that'll be advertised will be our day shift teams. And in future newsletters, you will see some swing shift hours and then even some graveyard hours. The good news for those who want to possibly come see our graveyard teams is, with us going to the 12-hour shifts, we're bringing our graveyard teams in earlier in the evening, so you don't have to wait until 10 o'clock to attend one of those briefings. So those will be forthcoming. And I think that's about it. We'll put the numbers up for Sergeant Sims to talk about. I think that it's just important to mention that this whole presentation tonight has been about largely about crime and how it affects our citizens and all of us who live here. And I think I'm happy to report the police department is continuing to effectively do its job, despite staffing challenges that we have. You'll see some news releases today where a couple of serial bank robbers were arrested. We recently arrested another serial robbery offender who had done, they have him linked to 42 different robberies around the city. The field officers continue to make arrests on the retail crime and on various other criminal activity. And they've also stepped up their traffic enforcement. So, crime is a huge problem for all of us in the public to try and solve, but I do want to commend my officers. I think that they've really stepped up, and we've continued as a police department to do our part of the criminal justice puzzle. And with that, I'll let Sergeant Sims present the numbers.
Sergeant Sims.
Thank you. All right, so we'll go ahead and start talking about crimes pertaining to property crimes. So in terms of larceny, we had 93 reported events of larceny, 29 auto burglary, 16 of residential burglary, 65 commercial burglary, which that's up looking at the numbers. Auto theft 60, which again that's up, and disturbances at 87. For crimes pertaining to that of a person or personal offense, family offense or domestic violence 210, aggravated assault and battery 83, robbery 75, and homicide 2, and criminal sexual penetration 6, for a total calls for service 6,914 calls for service. And do you
Willie, you have your hand up.
I do. Thank you. Thank you. This is very helpful. A couple of questions. Certainly, both the larceny numbers are significantly down. Is there, and as is the auto burglary numbers, are both significantly down from what they were last year. Is there something that you've been doing to attribute that to? I mean, that's pretty impressive drops in those two numbers.
I don't think we can say it's any one particular thing that would attribute to the decrease in those numbers. Like Commander said, you know, officers have been working really hard. We've been stepping up our traffic enforcement the past couple of months. That acts as a deterrent, and I think just increasing the overall visibility. Now, of course, these numbers are prior to the 12-hour shift being initiated, and I imagine that will have some sort of impact on it as well. But in terms of the proactive approach from officers, I believe that has some bearing and impact on it as well. Commander?
How will the 12-hour shifts impact this, by the way?
Well, with the 12-hour shifts, and feel free to butt in, Commander, from what I've seen just in past several weeks that we've been on the 12-hour shifts, we've had greater coverage. Calls haven't been holding quite as long, and it's allowed officers a little bit more time to be proactive for traffic stops and other such projects during their shift, being a little bit longer shift, and the shifts being spaced out a little bit differently than when we are on an 8-hour shift or a 10-hour shift.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. I also think we have more overlap with the schedule that just went into effect. What we've done is create more overlap during our busiest times. So our swing shift is coming in at noon now. Our day shift is actually staying until 8 o'clock at night. And then the graveyard is also, we have teams that come in at 7. And so what happens when you do that is that there are, in that peak time where we really see the calls that were bogging down the officers, if you will, and basically nobody was ever free to do anything proactive. What that's allowing is more coverage during that time so that we can do a little bit more proactive work. I saw a question pop up on the screen about breaking down white collar crime. So the larcenies actually is a generalized total of forgeries, shopliftings, and there's another one that's escaping me right now, but I can break it down further if that's something that people are interested in. It's just a combine of those three numbers. As far as the larcenies being down so much, I would like to take credit for all of it. I would like the police department to take credit for all of it. I don't think that that's really realistic. One of the issues is what you'll see is that the robberies have gone up, but the larcenies have gone down. What we're seeing is less shopliftings reported, but more robberies reported. And some of that's the structure of how the Second Judicial DA's office is now prosecuting certain types of shopliftings where a weapon comes to play before the person exits the property. They used to still treat those as what they would call a shoplifting with an assault. Now they are prosecuting them as robberies. So we are counting them as robberies. We're dispatching them as robberies. And so there's a little bit of a change in the numbers where the robbery numbers are going up and the shoplifting numbers are going down. But overall, we're still seeing quite a bit of theft. Unfortunately, it is pretty bad.
Kenneth, you've had your hand up.
Yeah, one of the other items that I also saw go down was family offenses. And I'm just curious, I know last fall and winter, there was discussion that APD would now have another group, like with a counselor of some sort. I apologize, I forgot the correct terminology, but there's a certain part of APD that would go and instead of just an officer that would talk to people and help like calm down the situations. I'm just wondering if that new group, and again, I apologize, I can't recall the name.
The community safety. Community
Yeah, that
safety.
one, community safety. Thank you, Vicki. If that is attributing to this decrease in family offense. And the second question I had real quick also is, I have also worked with Mothers Against Drunk Driving, the MAD group organization. And one of the questions they also want to know is, are there general like DWI statistics that can be obtained somehow?
We do have statistics on DWI arrests and so forth. I don't have access to that right away, but one of the things that we could do is try to have a presentation from our traffic unit at one of your future meetings. If you're interested in those, because it's not just DWIs. One of the things they track is how many fatal crashes do we have and how many serious injury crashes do we have, and what are the hot spots around the city and what's being done to address that. That's so Roy, I'll hand you a topic that you can pursue at a future meeting. But those numbers do exist. The family offenses, so yes, it's the ACS, Albuquerque Community Safety, is that.
That's the one, yeah.
That's the third department. They're mostly dealing with some mental health type calls and low level like encampments and that kind of thing. I don't know that they're impacting those family disturbance calls. I suspect with people being able to get out of the house more this year than they could last year, that that is more likely the reason that those are going down.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Francine, do we have any questions in the chat regarding this?
Yes. So one from Marguerite, and her statement is, in the disturbance area, what disturbance is included?
Really good question. That's kind of a broad category. So these are, again, based on our dispatch system. So these are not official crime numbers. So just because a disturbance is listed there doesn't mean that there was actually a crime committed or that the officers arrived and arrested somebody or anything like that. A disturbance can be anything from an individual who is, say, in front of a business panhandling and is causing a disturbance for that business. It could be someone walking around firing shots in the air. It could be, although that would come out as a different kind of call, but still the same idea. It could be two individuals that are seen arguing at a bus stop. So there's, it could be in a neighborhood, tires, getting somebody burning their tires out in a parking lot, let's say. So there's really a broad category of calls that could get classified as a disturbance. But what we'd like to see, and we do see overall, is that those calls are coming down. That's a good thing for the community.
Okay, thank you. I guess we can move to the next part of your presentation, use of force. Have we got anything on use of force for this meeting?
I hope I sent it to you. Did I? Or you get copied it anyway, I thought.
I may have, that might be my fault. I apologize. So we'll skip that. Make sure that I have it for next meeting. Sorry. So
yeah, I can tell you off the top of my head, we are at 0.5 incidents per 1,000 calls for service again this month, which is really good. And once again, family disputes lead the way in terms of the calls that officers end up using force in. So that's kind of a brief shot, but we can look at it again next month.
okay.
It'll also be in the newsletter.
Okay, thank you. Do we have anything on discipline or recruitment? I don't believe we have anybody here this evening to speak about recruitment, do we? I didn't see anybody. So I guess we'll move on to, we have on the agenda the status on our any Northeast CPC recommendations for Kelly.
We do not have any outstanding recommendations at the Northeast CPC at this time.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. Now, during this portion, if there are any concerns from our viewers, community members who are viewing that would like to put any concerns, thoughts, or anything in the chat right now that we could quickly pick up on and discuss, I'll give you a few minutes to do that.
So Commander Weber, what are the timeframes for the shifts now that we've moved to 12 hours? When do they start and finish and overlap and stuff?
They either start, the day shift starts at either 7 o'clock a.m. or 8 o'clock a.m. The swing shift starts at noon, and the night watch starts at either 7 p.m. or 8 p.m. It just depends on the day.
Okay.
A little bit of a shuffling, but those are the general, and they all work. They work 12-hour shifts, and then there are some scattered 8-hour shifts that they have to work in order to make the payroll system work right, in order to make the coverage work right.
Okay, thank you.
Along those lines, do you have any latitude, area command to area command, to alter your schedule a bit, or is it a union issue that's department wide in terms of the shifts?
Both. So the officers do, once the schedule is set, the officers bid to it, and so they do have a union right to that position once they bid to it. And so we do have rights to change hours, but it becomes complicated, so it doesn't generally happen. As far as the schedule itself, they take our input prior to setting the schedule, but it's fairly consistent across the area commands. It's based on the big picture, so to speak. So even if I say, well, I'd rather have my swing shift start at 2 o'clock, I don't really make that decision. That's made farther up.
Okay, thank you.
So how many officers do we have then patrolling the Northeast area now that the bid's done and everything's?
Well, let me check my newsletter. You're going to get my newsletter. It's going to have it listed.
Oh, okay.
I want to say it's higher than it was because we reshuffled the numbers. I had people that were on military deployments and so forth that kind of fell off my list, and other people who are not came onto it. But I want to say, give me 1 second. I'll let you. We're at 91 right now.
Oh, okay.
James, you have your hand up. James, do you have anything?
I have a question, but I also have a thought first. Quite a few people have come on asking what are best practices in the neighborhood as people are rattling door handles. Kind of my thought is, as Officer Weber and everybody else will say, don't forget to hide anything or remove it from your car where you're not a target. You know, I think that's the important thing. We own a shop and a repair shop, and we had 3 cars come in this week that were broken into, and you should just see all the stuff they have in it. I mean, it's just a magnet. So remember to always take everything in, hide it, and you'll find yourself will be less of a target. Also, in our neighborhood, one of our neighbors has that private security that comes 3 times a night. For some of those neighborhoods where maybe you're seeing it targeted higher, consider maybe partnering up with some neighbors to have that drive by a few times a night. I'm sure it's not cheap at $300 to $700 a month, but just that peace of mind discourages some of these guys. from hitting your neighborhood and again, hide your stuff. But my question is for Commander Weber. And again, this is just a question. It has nothing to do with your substation. I had to call 911 last week, and I had to call twice. The first time I called 911, it was just on some kind of weird, it was like searching and searching. So I hung up and I called again, and it was close to 3 minutes before they responded. And again, it's got nothing to do with you, but the question is, this was 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Are they trying to boost, how would you say, employees, traffic? I mean, so, as far as headcount in there, are we short-staffed? Is there an issue with the phone system? That sort of stuff. It was just, and this is not the first time it's happened. I just am sharing that with you, that you know, because I think that's downtown. But it was just kind of discouraging, and especially when something's going down with a gun that was out, it was pretty scary. Just wanted to share that with you.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts, and I think that you give good advice to people about taking belongings out of cars and so forth. People have, differing opinions on leaving their doors unlocked or not locked, and I'll kind of leave that there. But I will just leave off with the thought that we continue to see firearms stolen out of cars parked in driveways, and it happens more often than you would think. And that is concerning, and that is a message that I always try to get out is, you should never leave a gun in a car anywhere parked. And unfortunately, we have to discipline employees for doing the same thing, but it just shouldn't happen. And that's there was a mention about, the number of guns on the streets and that kind of thing. And that's how some of those guns find their way into the wrong hands, is people leave them in their car at night, which, they just shouldn't do. So the 911 center is, I'm not aware of any issue with the phone system itself. It's a pretty new system as far as I know. The staffing there is a problem. It has been a problem. I know that they are working to address it as best they can, but we have the hiring signs up just like everybody else. We're trying to find ways to attract people to do that job, and I know that they haven't been as successful as they would like. So we are short operators, we are short dispatchers, and it would not be the first time that somebody told me I called and I was on hold and I waited. Usually the 911 lines are still, they're the priority, and usually they are still answered quickly. The 242 cops lines can take a long time. Sometimes I've had people tell me, oh, it took me 20 minutes to get through, it took me 30 minutes to get through. Excuse me. All I can say is I apologize for that experience. I wish it was better. And I do encourage people to get our app on their smartphone. We do have an APD app, and you can actually create a call for service. I wouldn't do this in an emergency. I would still call 911, but for a non-emergency, you can create a call using the app. And I would encourage people, to do that if they're having trouble getting through.
Thank you for your service. Appreciate what you do.
Thank you, Commander Weber. Francine, do you want to finish up with any last questions or concerns that the community might have put in the chat?
Yes, so we have a question from Peggy. And she says there was an issue a few meetings ago regarding use of force investigations, and the recommendation was to test a process. Is there an update on this?
I'm sorry, I'm just looking for the question. Can you say it one more time?
Yes, sorry, my computer is freezing up. Give me 1 second.
Oh, I think I might have found it. Use of force investigations, and the recommendation was to test a process. Is there so there is. I was actually on a committee that was looking at revamping some of our process, not all of it, but some of the process that the field supervisors do. We met with the Justice Department. We met with the monitoring team. There's been some back and forth. That is an ongoing proposal. And I believe our compliance section is now working with the Justice Department on that. They do hope to pilot a process at some point in the near future, but I don't believe that process has been completely ironed out yet.
Okay, thank you. The next question is from Karen. And she asks, are the officers liking the 12-hour shifts, or are they only agreeing to it because they are required to do 12-hour shifts? Was this a union issue?
So our union, our collective bargaining agreement does allow us to do 12-hour shifts. So that's something that the union agreed to. As far as I know, there's always going to be mixed reviews. I had officers tell me they loved working 8-hour shifts and hated 10-hour shifts because 8 hours made the day just enough shorter that they could get stuff done during the week, and they didn't mind working an extra day. Then I had officers tell me 4 10-hour shifts was the best because they got more days off. And then we have officers who say they love the 12-hour shifts. We're 3 weeks in. I would say I'm still getting mixed feedback on, it's a long day. There's no doubt it's a long day, particularly if you're somebody who has the seniority to work a day shift spot and you were used to getting off at 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon and, coaching basketball or whatever you were doing, and now you're having to stay until 8 o'clock at night. That's a huge change to somebody's lifestyle. And we do understand that it impacts families and it impacts rest levels and all of those things. They are long days. Overall, I would say I've gotten very positive feedback so far. The officers do like the coverage better. So the day is a little bit less stressful, which always helps. And they get more days off overall that they're free, but time will tell. And certainly, if we start to see signs of burnout, then that's something the department needs to keep in mind moving forward.
Okay, thank you. The next question is from Peggy, and she asks, is there any way that those jobs can be done remotely?
Which jobs?
I think the 911.
Yeah, I think she was referring to the 911 operators.
I don't know fully the answer to that. I would guess not. There's quite a bit of technology and software that goes into that whole process. I don't know if that's something that they would want to start setting up at computers across the city. That would just be a guess, but that's always a guest speaker also that you can have is our dispatch, our communications supervisor. She's very knowledgeable. She goes to community meetings all the time to answer questions, and so maybe that's something that she could address.
Yeah, we'll put her on our list for speakers. Good idea. Is there anything else in the chat, Francine?
Nope, that's all.
Okay. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Make a motion to adjourn.
Got a motion?
Second.
Second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
I think it was a great meeting. Thank you,
Yes, sir.
APD, for showing up, and thank you all the council members for being here. This was a good meeting. Thank you.
Yes.
And thank you, Kelly and Martisa, for being here to help us out.
Have a great evening.
You too.
Thank you all.
You too. Good night.
Bye-bye.